This next session is a really important one. We've heard a lot of comments about reconciliation, decolonization, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, Indigenous rights and title. So this is an important conversation that we are very excited to have at the conference. Just to frame it out, today we will be talking about UNDRIP, Indigenous rights, tied to clean energy, kind of from a federal perspective and others. And then tomorrow, later afternoon, we're going to have a conversation specific about economic reconciliation. So the session this afternoon is about UNDRIP and Indigenous rights and how that relates to clean energy projects. So the awesome panel is already up here. I just want to first quickly go through. So Kory Wilson, Executive Director, Indigenous Initiatives and Partnerships at BCIT, will be facilitating the session. Judith Sayers, I think, is online and going to join us. She is the president of Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council. We have Bruce McIvor, who's a partner with First Peoples Law. We have AJ Esquega from Gull First Nation. We have Aphrodite Salas, professor and journalist from Concordia University. And finally, we have Jordyn Burnouf, who is a senior associate with Medicine Rope Strategies. Welcome them up. That's wrong. That's old. How can I reference you? So Jordyn Burnouf with Métis Nation. So welcome everybody to this session.
Hello? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Grateful to be here today and having this very interesting panel. We decided while we were at our table that it's going to be a fabulous panel and everybody's going to be wonderful and amazing. So we're looking forward to it. The title of this session is UNDRIP and Indigenous Clean Energy Projects. And we've heard, as was just mentioned, a lot of talk around reconciliation, a lot of talk around, legislation, policies, these various things. And UNDRIP is often that one document, if you will, that's kind of out there and floating around. And what does it actually mean for us as Indigenous people? What does it mean to implement and follow UNDRIP? So we're going to have our sessions today where everybody's going to share their stories in relation to UNDRIP and the clean energy projects that they've been involved in, as well as having a conversation with some takeaways, hopefully, to give you some ideas on what you can do tomorrow, or maybe a few days, a few weeks later, to implement UNDRIP. And of course, you know that UNDRIP is an international document that reflects minimum standards to advance and promote Indigenous rights and title around the world. And so to start with, I'm not sure, Judith is not there? No, just continue on.
I'm here, Kory.
Oh, I cannot see you, Judith, I'm sorry. Oh, now I see you, hi.
Hi.
So I think we'll start with Judith because she's online and it's working right now. So Judith, the first part, just if you don't mind giving us a bit of a chat about, of course, the overlap and, the somewhat overused words around the intersectionality of UNDRIP, Indigenous rights and title, and clean energy projects. What's your experience with that in those areas?
Thank you, Kory, and good to see everybody again. Reconciliation used to be the big word and most used, and now it's UNDRIP, or in British Columbia we call it DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act. And now we have the federal law, the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, which came into effect in June of this year. So the big challenge is that how do we implement what is in UNDRIP? UNDRIP was a huge effort by Indigenous people around the world to put in place some international norms, and of course didn't get everything that we wanted. I spent about 10 years working on it in the early years of the declaration before the declaration was put in place, so kind of follow the history and know what it is. In British Columbia, the act was passed 2.5 years ago, and we're still kind of waiting for implementation. And of course, UNDRIP itself was put into place in 2007. So nothing happens fast in Indigenous country, even though we would sure like it to be. So there are many important concepts within UNDRIP, one being the right of self-determination and the right to freely determine our own economic development, the right to manage, own, possess our own natural resources and make our own decisions, the right to the use of all our natural resources and manage them. And in reality, we don't. I mean, can you imagine what we could be doing now in clean energy if we had within our territories the ability to make use of all the resources to do so? So what we're trying to do within British Columbia and now within Canada is to find ways to implement it so that we can have our own jurisdiction to develop energy projects. And this, as part of the BC law, there's two parts to it. One is an action plan and one is changing laws. And so in the action plan, we tried really hard to get 4 or 5 actions around clean energy. We ended up with a very general, we're going to work on clean technology. And it really wasn't what we wanted. And of course, laws that we need to change, of course, will be the Clean Energy Act, because the Clean Energy Act just says that BC has to provide opportunities to First Nations. And of course, there's nothing behind that with teeth. And also the Retail Access Act, which would allow us to have access to the grid, to put in place First Nations utilities. And so, and each of you, I know that only Canada and BC right now have these laws, but looking federally at some of the laws and programs, we also have that opportunity right now to do that. So I might address that just a little bit more than BC, because the federal government right now is asking First Nations, what do you want in the action plan? And what laws do you want changed? They created quite a big fund to do that. So if you haven't applied for that, I think April 15th might have been the last deadline. But, sitting down in your communities and saying, okay, what do we need? What do we want in clean energy in our province, within what we're doing right now? So some of the things that, I was brainstorming about is to do things like in climate change. Is there enough money being put into renewables in Canada, and should that be an action plan that we are able to do that? Because funding has always been one of the biggest issues that we have had within clean energy. Grants and other things are hard to find. Also, training. We need lots of training. How do we put in place solar and geothermal? And, we need to train our people to do that. I think one of the things we also need to change is moving up their 2050 net zero emissions much sooner. With the impacts of climate change in our communities, we need to change that. And of course, that would include a huge reliance on clean energy, clean technology. They have their Net Zero Emissions Act, and that could be something we'd look at to see if we can change what's going on there. And so decreasing greenhouse gases, is very, very critical to our communities to do that. Electrification, getting off of diesel, putting more money into remote communities and their ability to get off diesel much quicker than is possible today. There's been a lot of discussion today. Dave had some awesome charts this morning about how that would be. Housing. ISK is in charge of our housing. What are they doing to give us energy efficient homes? They don't. They only give you basic homes. Why can't we be putting in energy efficient homes? Passive housing, clean energy, none of that is included in their budget. That's something that we could put into an action plan. Oops, sorry, just put my clock on. To do that. So, working with Environment Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, what are the programs that we need to change? What are the policies we need to change? We need to put that in place. If we're going to expect UNDRIP to be working in our communities, we have to have those concrete suggestions and not waiting for the federal government to put them together. We just need to be assertive and aggressive and put forward what we need. And we're doing that within British Columbia as much as we can to change and create opportunities for First Nations and clean energy. 5 minutes isn't a lot of time. So those are the highlights of the points that I wanted to make.
Great, great. Thank you for those, Judith. And I appreciate the fact that you're saying that this will take time, but we could move this forward if we actually just started actioning this. And as you said, in all of the different areas that are important, whether it's training, whether it's housing, whether it's changing the Clean Energy Act, and that the solutions really do have to come from Indigenous people as to what will work for us and how we can implement or move towards a more intentional implementation of UNDRIP. And speaking of UNDRIP and people who create documents and legislation, we'll go to Bruce McIvor next. Yeah, use that one.
Does that work? Yeah, okay. If it's, I don't think I can sit on this sofa here. I've had so many of those sweets, I'm going to put myself to sleep. So if it's okay with the rest of you, and I can't see people over there, but I will keep track of my time. So thank you very much for joining us. Remember a few years ago, I was in a meeting in the cabinet room with former Ontario Premier Wynne and Treaty 9 clients from Northern Ontario. And we were there to talk about Anishinaabe jurisdiction and finding that space where my clients could exercise their own laws and decision-making. And I remember very distinctly Premier Wynne turning to me and saying, "Mr. McIvor, that all sounds fine, but I can't change the law." And it was all I could do to bite my tongue to say, we don't need you to change the law, we just need you to follow the law. And I think that still rings true. And it goes to a fundamental shortcoming that I find in my work across the country, a barrier to implementing UNDRIP, and particularly free, prior, and informed consent, is there's this falsehood that all decision-making lies in provincial, federal, territorial governments. And those are the decision makers, and Indigenous people are there to be consulted with about a decision that colonizing governments will make about their lands, waters, and territories. And that's just a fundamental misunderstanding, I think often willfully, by governmental officials and by a lot of lawyers too at the same time, because the space for exercising Indigenous laws and consent is fundamental to the history and law of Canada. This dates back at least as far as the Royal Proclamation of 1763. This is a part of Canadian history that you need consent. Space for that. I see it all the time. I was just on a call yesterday with very well-intentioned federal government officials. We were talking, I was there on behalf of Treaty 3 clients, water regulation on Lake of the Woods, and the barrier we go up against all the time is, well, there's no space for exercising Anishinaabe laws. Sorry, we'd love to do it, but we got to follow this statute or regulation, and that's no excuse. That's a problem with Canadian law, not recognizing that Indigenous decision-making and jurisdiction is fundamental to it. It's protected by the Canadian Constitution. The problem is that they've occupied all the space. And in occupying the space, there's this thought that, well, therefore, Indigenous people don't have their own laws and don't have their own decision-making. It's just completely false. Even when you get times when there is legislative space, it's hard for a lot of non-Indigenous people, a lot of government people to get their minds around it. A few weeks ago, I was giving submissions to a Senate committee on exercising Mi'kmaq commercial rights to the fisheries. And one of the things I emphasized is, in that particular situation, under the Federal Fisheries Act, there's actually space there, written right into the legislation to do this. And when we speak to government officials, what we get back is, well, wait a minute, doesn't it have to be delegated to those Mi'kmaq first? Doesn't it have to be delegated powers from the province or federal government? And I just hit my head. No, this is inherent decision-making, inherent jurisdiction. Maybe you need something delegated to you. My clients certainly don't. They were born with it. They carry it with them. They always have. And so that's one of the key issues, is implementing UNDRIP, is overcoming that barrier. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And thank you. As you were talking, it reminds me of the kind of the saying that diversity is a reality and inclusion is a choice. I mean, our laws, and in my case, the potlatch system has existed since the beginning of time, and it's not something that has to be delegated to me as a Kwakwaka'wakw person. So thank you for that. And now we have Jordyn.
Hello, everybody. So yeah, Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. But I'd like to just first start with a land acknowledgement, and one that we often forget. One of the very first treaties that ever existed was our agreement between the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the winged ones, and the creepy crawlies. Right? That was our very first treaty. We understand treaty. We understand agreements. Right? And I think Bruce just read my notes and said everything I was going to say, but I'm just kidding. But no, like right down to it. I've been, I think, over analyzing what UNDRIP means, and trying to get down to the technical part of things. But really, all it is kinship. Right? Like, you look at that first treaty, that's an agreement to say, I am a steward of this land. I'm here to protect this land. And UNDRIP and the treaties Canada has with Indigenous nations, those have existed since, Canada became Canada, or what we consider Canada. Those things existed. We understand how that works. So when the question of implementation and how we deal with UNDRIP comes about, like, it puzzles me that we still don't get it and we don't recognize it. But it's as simple as a power transfer, right? Inherent rights. I spoke to one of my mentors about this very discussion, and his advice is, inherent rights supersedes any sort of agreement that we have, right? And as Indigenous people, we have inherent rights to protect these lands. And they're not ours, they're not yours, they're not anybody's. We belong to the lands. So I think we need to understand UNDRIP as a relationship, as this understanding of kinship and how communities work. And we need to start conducting ourselves in that way, in the business that we do, in the company that we keep, right? We have friendships that we make. We have working relationships that we make. And those are based off of our values and what guide us as human beings, right? And then some companies have more rights than most people on this earth. And we need to recognize that, all those corporate values, all of these things that we say guide us and, align us as people and doing business, we need to start thinking of each other as, it's not private sector versus public versus government. We're all working towards the same thing, right? And that's protecting this earth, caring about what happens for the future. Whether or not you want to admit that or you believe that, that's what it is to be human. And I think we just need to go back to those very foundational teachings that, you know, as inherent rights holders of this land, we carry that. And that's why Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous people are so very vital to this just transition and where we go in the future. And I think I raised a question earlier about jurisdiction, right? And I think that's one of the areas I see, you know, doing work with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. I advise the vice president, and she's also the Minister of Environment. And we do a lot of work in duty to consult, and I know this is like, you know, behind the times and whatever, but that's what we're working with right now, and it's unfortunate, and I wish Saskatchewan operated in a different way in a lot of other provinces and Canada, you know, but that's kind of where it is right now. But, okay, one of the things I think we should look at is, you look at corporate structures and the energy industry, right? IBAs, look at BHP, for example, not to call out any company, but they have 100-year agreements, you know, and to say that we don't know how to implement UNDRIP, like, that blows my mind. That's a treaty, right? That agreement between a corporate body and a government and people, that's a treaty. We understand that. But to say that we can't implement UNDRIP in the same way, like, somebody's making excuses, right? And it's that simple. So that jurisdictional question, I think, is something that we need to think about, and that is honestly in my work, and I am very limited in experience, I will admit that, but I think that's one of the biggest things, like the crux of most of these issues that we have with land and resource management, is that jurisdictional issue, that government gets to pass it kind of back and forth, and we don't actually have to, you know, be held accountable, or government and companies don't have to be held accountable for, you know, this new development that happens. Legislation is created, but it's not followed, right? And that's what was said, is just follow it. You made it, follow it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jordyn. And I think when you talk about kinship and you talk about relationships, that goes above and beyond the minimum standards of Indigenous rights, title, and that protection, that UNDRIP. They say UNDRIP is there for the minimum standards. That takes us to a level that is more macro and obviously more inclusive and holistic, that UNDRIP is not here just for us, but it's for the rest of Canada and the rest of the world as well. And now we'll go over to AJ.
Check. Hey. Thank you, Miigwech. Bonjour, Anin, AJ Esquega, Nindish Kashkizagi, and Donji. Wingego Menendang Gitanishnabe Mian, Nin Nistatambangi Yatago. My name is AJ Esquega, and I come from Gull Bay First Nation. I really like speaking my native tongue, but I only understand a little bit. So I like to also mention that I have an open heart and an open mind, because I'm going to share the journey of a project in my community that has a little bit of trigger warning here. You know, there's some harsh things that happen in a community, and I want to share that journey where there was some positives that came out of it. So back in the 1920s to 1950s, there was 5 dams constructed on our waterways on Lake Nibigun. And those dams, there were no consultation, no direction, or no input from the community, or anything was involved for the communities around that lake. And those dams caused the waterways on that lake to rise, and they caused our shoreline to erode into the lake, and it caused our cemeteries to erode, and the bodies of our families and ancestors to seep into the lake. It also caused our wild rice beds to flood and distinguish. So the community was stuck there, wondering what is happening, why is this happening? And then so, you know, they had to go and grab the bodies and go rebury them at another cemetery location. So flash forward, at that time, there was megawatts of power being produced from the waters of where my people have used and sustained their lives for generations and since time immemorial. But not a single watt of power was provided for Gull Bay First Nation. It was provided to the Ontario province, to the municipalities, you know, so Gull Bay intentionally was left in the dark. Flash forward to 1960, then we got diesel generation power. Great, we can put on the lights now. And we, you know, obviously didn't know too much about diesel technology back then. We just thought, great, turn on the powers, but realizing that that's a harmful substance that, you know, impacts our environment. If it was our decision and we had the knowledge then, we probably wouldn't have chose that energy because it's not in tune with our values. So we were on diesel generation since 1960s up until, so there was that past grievance, I should say, that was not dealt with, and you know, there was no OPG, which was a different name at the time, and there was other parties involved in that decision of those dams. So in the spirit of reconciliation, yes, the story is about reconciliation between OPG and Gull Bay, but there was the Ontario government and the federal government also as part of that process. So, but back to the story, this is a story with Gull Bay and OPG. 2014, that's when OPG and Gull Bay, through negotiations and through talks of you know, the effects from the dams in the past and the effects on the community and moving forward, they came up with a settlement agreement and a path moving forward for reconciliation, to rebuild trust between the two, because trust was severed. We need to rebuild that. And how do you rebuild that? You got to work together with understanding each other's values, understanding each other's hurts, and you know, understanding what's the benefits that each team can bring to provide a long-lasting, fruitful relationship. And so there was a celebration in Gull Bay, 2014, on reserve and then off reserve. And that's when, so when that celebration happened with the apology and commemoration of a plaque, they said, okay, now we have to address the need for power, the need to grow the community. And they talked about, because Gull Bay First Nation is one out of 4 communities in the north that are never going to be hooked up to the grid, we had to think about, you know, independent energy systems, isolated energy systems. So they came up with the idea for solar and battery energy storage. And we got the teams together, and it was important with that project is that Gull Bay First Nation Chief and Council were at the table on the decision-making process along the way. And there was also funding that was mandated for development partners or utilities to partner with First Nations. So that was a good thing to start looking at this innovative technology and bring it to the community, work together. And you know, there was a project development agreement that both parties worked on that made sense for both. Each party had a win-win situation. And the construction finally happened in March 1st, or the transfer. The project was at first negotiating, okay, well, OPG will own Gull Bay will own 25%, and then we'll own 100% in 20 years or something like that. And then Chief and Council says, no, we want 100% on the day that that's tested and proven, you know, through economic, so we can start looking at energy sovereignty or economic reconciliation. So they negotiated hard and they agreed to that deal. And we made sure that we had an independent engineer review it and that it was tested and proven and functioned. And then we also had the transition support after the project was built. And so March of 1st of this year would have been 1 year where we kind of like operated it ourselves. And there's still some issues with the system. So we're keeping OPG close and accountable, because it's going to take some time for us to build that capacity to operate it and to have the revenues to cover the operation costs. Because you don't want to all of a sudden, this is a beautiful project, and then it all mothballed in the future because it wasn't, didn't produce the solar productions or the revenues that it's supposed to. So part of that reconciliation is making sure that the project and the working together continues on until both parties are, happy and satisfied for the next generation. And so that's kind of where we're at, and we're kind of, it's the first of its kind in Canada, so we're learning, and that's why I'm here, is to kind of share that and share the story of our journey with OPG, and hoping that Ontario and the federal governments can start looking at maybe this as a model for other communities. We can't move ahead in a healthy way if we don't address all the harms and the traumas in the past. We can't just brush it under the carpet and then say, that's in the past. We got to deal with that, because otherwise that'll fester, it'll carry on. I don't know the word in Ojibwe, but I know the word in Pastaho, or in Ojibwe, and I'm not Ojibwe, I just was taught this when I was in some circles. And Pastahoan is when you hurt somebody and there's a friction there. And that friction carries on through generations and generations. It's just, it carries on. And if you don't deal with that, or you don't acknowledge that, and you come together, it just ripples and carries on to the future. So when I think about our next generation, and I think about all the stuff that, that happened in the past, we got to kind of look at that. Who harmed, and in this sense, the provincial and utilities in some of these cases. We got to deal with that so we can move forward in a healthy way. And when we do that, Indigenous communities have the people, they have the land to partner and build, and they have to be the ones that are making the decisions, for their inherent rights and their title holders. So I hope I had have an open heart and open mind. Take what you think is helpful for you, and leave the rest. And I do want to mention, I invited Aphrodite Salas here. She documented our story, which we're going to share, and it was really nice to have her team from Concordia University, because it was important that we told our story, and it wasn't seeming like it was a consultant or some other person telling our story. Because at the time, we were just starting off, growing as a community, addressing all our needs, energy needs, our school needs, and stuff like that. But we didn't have a microphone, and Aphrodite had a microphone. So part of that, part of the project and reconciliation is collaborating, but having an understanding of what each other is going to bring to the table, so that it benefits the community and everyone. So,
Great.
Miigwech, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And we will, at the end of this session, we will get to see the video at the very end. And I'll just turn it over to Aphrodite.
Thank you so much, Kory, and thank you, AJ, for your words. It means so much to me to be here on this panel with you, and Jordyn, and of course, Kory, everybody, just because the work, I feel, is very important. And when AJ says that he comes with an open heart and open mind, I can absolutely attest to that, because that is what I was met with when I first went to Gull Bay First Nation back in 2018 with Daryl Brown, who's in the crowd. Daryl, and Daryl told me about what was happening in Gull Bay First Nation, and he brought me there to meet AJ, Chief and Council, and ask for permission to work together collaboratively to share their story of climate leadership. And just a word about my work. I focus on challenging the colonial ideologies and systems that I grew up with by focusing on decolonizing journalism education, and on respecting and on amplifying Indigenous perspectives in journalism and the media, specifically around climate leadership. So I lead a research project that's centered on alternative methods of collaborative and conciliatory journalism that really aims to move the profession away from conflict narratives, from the, I should say, traditional Western, very colonized way of doing journalism, And the project itself is deeply rooted in Call to Action 86, which aims to change these negative, damaging narratives that we have seen for generations that have misrepresented Indigenous values and communities for so long. So I come to this work with a very open heart and an open mind as well. And I'm currently working with a number of communities. Jordyn's is one of them. And the first one was Gull Bay First Nation. So the research collaboration is also being supported by Indigenous Clean Energy and Chris Henderson, my research partners. Basically, we work together with the community and teams of students to produce a multimedia site and a short documentary, 9 minutes, on the energy and climate leadership. And we did it also in collaboration with Canadian Television CTV, which has meant a lot as my media partner. So really, it was based on mutual understanding, and nothing was published without the community reviewing everything first, telling us, did we get this right? The process took about a year, and AJ and I were on text, like every Friday we were editing, and I'd text AJ to make sure that we were getting things right, that we weren't going to misrepresent the community in any way. And I'm just a few more words. Given the complexity of governing UNDRIP, energy policy, and Indigenous-led initiatives, amplifying these clean energy partnerships is so important, and it's more important than ever. But key to this, as a non-Indigenous person who's very grateful to be in this space, it's taking the time and the care to work together and collaboratively over time, and knowing when you embark on the work that it will take years, and we're getting there. And that's where I'm coming from on this, and I'm very grateful to share my involvement. Thank you.
Great, thank you everyone for the comments. I think you've brought up some very key points and key issues that are on the ground. You know, whether it's a nation where the water's being diverted to provide power for someone else. I've never understood. We have all these massive mining companies and various places all over Canada. They have reliable internet, they have clean water, they have electricity, but the First Nations that are sometimes just mere kilometers down the road have absolutely nothing. And this is obviously a role and a place for journalism to tell those stories and to assist us with getting that message out there. So one of the questions too, and I think I've heard a few people say, but how do we do this? What does it mean? What does UNDRIP mean? You know, it's not a law. It's not, and we see only British Columbia actually has enacted DRIPA and passed legislation to try to have it enforced, but we're still struggling in British Columbia with what that actually means. Even though the government has put out an implementation plan, it's still, what does it actually mean? So with everybody that's in this audience, that's in various different capacities in their own, whether they're working for themselves, whether they're working for the federal, provincial, territorial governments, or a company, or they're just a student, or they're interested, what is something that you think, I'll ask all of you, but what are some takeaways or something, or maybe even a bit of a challenge to the audience as to what they can do tomorrow or 2 months from now or a year from now to actually begin implementing DRIPA. And I'm not sure if Judith is still on. Judith, are you still there? Oh, okay, Judith. Do you want to start, Judith? We're just going to have a quick go through.
Okay. Well, I think that you have to know UNDRIP. You have to know what the provisions are and decide what is most important to you. Is it free, prior, and informed consent? And what does that mean within your territory and your resources? Or, for example, there's a lot of provisions in UNDRIP that deal with reparation, restitution, and compensation. Look through your territory. What has been destroyed? What would be your process? Put together a proposal. Give it to the federal or provincial government, whoever destroyed it, and say, we want compensation for that. And take that money and use it to put towards economic development or culture So I think you really have to be familiar with what's in there, so then you can make those demands, or just what is self-determination to our nation? I think there's a lot of questions that we can ask. You know, where are we going? Where do we want to go? And how do we determine our social, cultural, and economic development? So just some of those challenges that need to be out there, because free, prior, and informed consent, reparation, restitution are a couple of the more controversial things within UNDRIP, and just putting our own thoughts into that, I think, is really important.
Great, thank you for that. And that kind of goes on both sides, not only as Indigenous people knowing where we are, what we have, what we want, where we want to go, but at the same time, others actually reading the document and reading, you know, the various pieces of legislation that are out there now. I often hear from people as well that like, well, we don't know what to do. Well, what do Indigenous people want? There have been countless documents, and there's, you know, long before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, countless documents that have, where Indigenous people have clearly articulated what we want and what we need. So education is a really key point. And maybe I'll go with you, Aphrodite, just because you are in a post-secondary institution. What are some actions or takeaways, or perhaps a challenge to the group?
100%. It's all about education, educating yourself, educating others, being open, reading the documents, reading and understanding your own positionality as to where you're coming from in this area, and then choosing what is it that you care about, what is it that you want to begin fighting for. You know, what is your positionality regarding this legislation? I think that's key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, education, education, education. Jordyn, how about you? What are you're writing a lot of notes down there.
Hello. Okay. First of all, I think I'd just like to maybe call out this ghost ship of meritocracy that exists. And I think we talk about reconciliation a lot, and we talk about, you know, understanding all of the things that have happened in Indigenous communities. You know, I look at what we're going through right now. My community, Isla Cross. It's a historical Métis community, one of the oldest Métis communities in Western Canada, kind of opened the way for the fur trade to expand to the west. It's got a really cool history. But Isla Cross is home to one of the oldest residential schools in Canada, but it's not federally recognized. It's not even provincially acknowledged. It's still considered a boarding school. Most of the students there were First Nations and Métis. Many were Métis. So that's where this like jurisdictional thing comes into effect again, right? But I think what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, we look at UNDRIP and trying to implement this, but I think we truly need to take some time to understand where communities come from and how people exist, right? I heard questions coming up about like, we need to get Indigenous people up to the pace of skills and training and get them on board and get communities up to speed kind of thing. And it's like, okay, but first understand and recognize and acknowledge why communities are where they are. Right? My mushroom went to residential school, and he's like, it was good. I learned how to read and write. And I'm like, yeah, but at a grade 2 level. And the man 2 hours away, he got a grade 12 degree. He's an engineer, and he has a farm and all of this great stuff, you know? And my mushroom just like struggled till he passed, you know? Like, these are the communities that we come from, and that's what Canada is built off of, and we still don't acknowledge the truths that happen every single day, you know? And we need to understand that. We need to understand where communities are to be able to understand and truly enact equitable solutions, right? If you have an inclusion and diversity plan, be sure that it's equitable, right? Understand what that truly means and get to know people, get to know communities. Like AJ said, it's ongoing, right? Reconciliation is not this cool thing that we get to like slap on our next report. Reconciliation is community, and it's building that community. And that's what I love about this, like, it's so cool to hear all the information and see everybody and all the great work that we're doing, but we're building community here. It's so beautiful. And I think, you know, that's the direction we need to go. And we just need to understand each other as human beings, right? We're all just trying to like do some good, I hope.
Thanks for that. And I think it goes again to what you said earlier about kinship is building relationships, but the relationships have to be grounded and founded on truth, not on misrepresentation, not on a particular perspective's understanding of those actions. So it's yeah, foundation of truth is absolutely important. AJ?
Thank you. Still on, check, yeah. Yeah, and I think the call to, or one of the things, the call to action, or what you can do with UNDRIP right now, and it kind of ties what Judith says, is recognize where those harms or those things in the past that affected your territory, and without your consultation, and that find those and look at opportunities within there, and just draft a letter, or and then saying, let's meet, you know, let's talk about partnering or dealing with those issues and past grievances. There's opportunities there. And you know what, looking at partnership even just in general, it doesn't have to come from, you know, a past grievance, but it could be just some innovative technology that an existing utility wants to try out and, you know, and build upon. Because I think like we got to move fast if we want to hit these targets of climate action to kind of reverse the effects of climate, climate emergency here. So now's the time, and I look at our next generation, our younger generation, they're rising, they're getting smarter, and they're getting fired up, and that's awesome and beautiful to see. And, you know, just to say that we're committed, and I think that's another thing too, is like, the commitment, and when we say, okay, calls to action or UNDRIP, it's these things or these legislation that was written, but are we committed to it? And is it just like an existing document that's going to be passed around for a while? And you know, I'm committed to creating a better future for my next generation, for my Donis, my little daughter, you know, for the people around in my community. And, you know, as much as there's highs and lows in my role and responsibility, and it's those tough conversations, you have that, you have to do it for their well-being. And I think when we deal with that, we feel better, we feel lighter. And if we deal with that with all the issues and the grievances and between First Nations and the communities and the Ontario or the governments and stuff like that, we'll feel lighter as Canada, and we'll start working together. And this, we can be proud to be from Canada, you know. So I don't know, I kind of blabbled there. So, but miigwech.
You reflected your passion. That's very good. Thank you. And it's really important, of course, to think of the next generation, and all that we do is, and what we're going to leave, the legacy. What legacy are we being for the, or what legacy are we leaving for them, right? Bruce?
Sure. It's on, yeah. I'm going to stand up again because I'm too short to see past this podium thing here. So, okay. So one thing we could do tomorrow to implement UNDRIP, stop consulting. And I know that's anathema to a lot of people, particularly government folk, but I think we really are in a post-consultation world, or we should be. I remember being there when the Haida and Taku cases were argued at the Supreme Court, and it's been a significant victory for Indigenous people all across the country. But at the day they rendered the decision, and particularly in Taku, how a lot of you will know, they went through and approved the BC environmental assessment process, even though the legislation had changed since before the court had made its decision. But there was the seed for the failure of the duty to consult. There it was, that box ticking consultation that so many of you are familiar with. It's turned into a large degree a duty to create a consultation log. That's not what it was supposed to be, right? We should be beyond that. We should be focusing on consent. That's what it should be about. And when government people come to Indigenous territory, they should come not saying, we'd like to consult with you about a decision we're going to make. They should be saying, how can we get your consent for this proposal? And that would be totally change the conversation. So if we're going to do one thing and we could start doing this tomorrow, that would be the fundamental change. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And again, I think that goes to getting at the truth, and the information and the knowledge is out there. It just has to be picked up and included and talked about, and the starting point, shifting the goalposts of where we start. Is there a question on WOVA? I didn't see one. No? Okay. So then we will go, if there's any questions in the Longhouse. Is anything? Anybody know? Was I supposed to go to the other room first? Just go here? Okay. All right. Hello.
Tansei. Good afternoon, distinguished panel. Wonderful words. So in relation to UNDRIP, actually talking about FPIC in particular, I was part of I guess a consultation round with industry last year with the Canadian government on implementing UNDRIP. And a lot of the things that industry players were insinuating was that, does FPIC give sort of a veto on project development? And of course, the short answer is yes. If Indigenous peoples don't want this project to happen for various reasons, of course, it shouldn't proceed. But my question, I guess, to the panel is, what would your response be to industry who sort of were not wanting the FPIC clause to be as strong, or who have some, who are withholding, I guess, on fully supporting UNDRIP just based on that?
Thank you for your question. I think I'll go with Bruce to answer.
Well, this is one of the things that drives me nuts. There's lots of things I do, and I work coast to coast to coast, and I use the veto word as kind of a barometer for how sophisticated government people are. And the more they say veto, the less sophisticated I know they are. It's not about vetoes, as you all know. It's about decision making. And when government industry says no veto, what that really means is, and we're going to go ahead and make the decision we always intended to make because you don't have a veto. That's how it's used as a tool against Indigenous people. I think we need to get away from that language. It should be about seeking consent. And that's a very different type of engagement. And stop using the veto word to beat down Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I mean, it's very important, right? I think also another thing people get confused about is that often they think consent means consensus. That is not the case. We can disagree agreeably and move projects forward and or not, or move them in a different direction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wilta. First of all, I just want to acknowledge you and the other panel members, but most because I knew your dad at the constitutional processes. So I wanted to say a couple of things. I think there's value in the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. I accept that. But, what's interesting is that this upcoming year is going to be 40 years since the constitutional amendments were made in 1982. 10 years after, then there was the Meech Lake and then the Charlottetown Accord in 1992. And I wanted to make this comment here. is that in 1992, Canada, the governments of Canada, all the provinces and the Prime Minister at the time, all accepted that First Nations or Indigenous governments, including Inuit, Métis, and First Nations, would be recognized as third order of governments. That was a fact. And it just seems that we are always struggling to get back to that point where this notion of sharing power is somehow always being challenged and denied. And if we could go back to that point, I'll make this comment, and it is this. And I'm just looking at, I'll talk about Saskatchewan. You know, I remember Premier Devine at the time, and the reason why I know a lot of this is I was actually right at the table. I was in the front row in the conversations in 1992. So Premier Devine was a really tough person. And the irony about that toughness is he eventually came to that point where he said, Indigenous governments will be a third order of government equal to and greater than the provinces and the government of Canada. They accepted that. Now the work that needed to be done was all about negotiations, and that is always the issue of trying to define those things. But here we are again, talking about another document that's going to try to resolve or define that relationship that we have been working for over hundreds of years, whether or not it's with treaties or modern day agreements. And the other thing is that I wanted to say is that it just seems that the more we negotiate, the less the Indigenous people have. And the process everybody asks people to come to is with goodwill. And what I find often is that because people don't have that corporate history and knowledge in the relationship that was around the table, we no longer want to abide by the arrangements that were reached. And so we change them, we move the goalposts. It's nowhere, anywhere it was in 1992, and it's nowhere it was in our case, 1921, at the signing of Treaty 11. So I think if we're going to change the relationship, we ourselves, that idea and notion of education becomes really critical. Because as we talk about clean energy, how we build relationships and partnerships and change the way we do business, that same way of thinking has to be in terms of the way we recognize and work with governments, not purely and always on projects, but changing relationships between people and recognizing the governments that properly represent the interests of our people. And I think if that happens, we're going to change how we ourselves relate with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your decades and decades of work at the table on behalf of Indigenous people. And we'll give Jordyn an opportunity to respond.
Hello. Thank you, Richard. That's one of the mentors that I go to for that knowledge. And I think we've talked about this a bit already, but just like in response to what Richard was saying, I think I look at my own community, right? And we talk about FPIC and that free portion, that free part of FPIC. Coercion, I think we need to understand, like, that's a really ugly word, right? But you look at communities, you look at, like, my community, for example, like, suicide rates are huge, youth incarceration rates. Here's an interesting fact for you. 98% of incarcerated girls in Saskatchewan are Indigenous. That's systemic issues. Like, those things exist. And I think it's like 96 or 94% for boys. So when we think about things like that, and when industry comes to community, is that free? You know, and communities are still trying to survive when jobs, when, I won't say a company, but when a company comes to the Métis Nation, for example, and says, here's 100 jobs for this huge uranium project we want to do. To me, that's so hurtful. Like, that's so hurtful. Like, you know, but sometimes we take that as communities because that's going to help our economy. That's going to help those social issues that exist in our economy. So rethink the way that you think about things like free, prior, and informed consent, right? Look at that word coercion and how that exists in, you know, these kids' lives who were taken by suicide, right? Those things all apply to FPIC. And it's just our understanding and our relationship, this friendship we're building here now. Are we thinking about the families that are associated with the business that we're conducting in communities? And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Thank you for that. And I think it's, again, brought up another point too, that it's not just around incarceration, but Indigenous people are at the negative end of every socioeconomic indicator in Canada. So what is the level of capacity that we have to negotiate on the same level or somewhat close, equal level to non-Indigenous people or companies? So those are really, really big concerns. Does anybody have any other comments they want to say to that, or do we have another question from the audience? Oh, well, was there anything? I don't think there's anything from the other room, but yes, I see him, but there's nothing in the other rooms, right? I can't. Okay, the other room, is there any questions in the other room? But I don't know how to see it. Is that a no? Okay, well, maybe if there is, maybe somebody can just wave if there's a question in the other room, but I'll go to the okay, there's nothing, thank you. So your turn, thanks.
My name is Quaxis. I'm from Owikino. With this UNDRIP and with all these projects that we're doing, I wanted to raise the word acquiescence. I think the gentleman in the white shirt probably understands that. What's happened is, like, we did a $13 million hydro plant, but for a water license, the province is taxing us. I think it's $34,000 a year, and that hydro station, it's not on our reserve, but it's in our traditional lands. And we just finished building, or we're about to finish building community wharf, and we built a wall there. And I found it really strange. The province said that they wanted to do security, so they said we have to pay $10,000 as a security, just in case we leave town. You know, we've been there for thousands of years, but somehow they have this thing, and we're going to be giving it to our lawyers, but they're saying you might leave Rivers Inlet, and we might have to clean up a mess that you make, and that's why we want that $10,000. I kind of want to know how that, you know, to me it's acquiescence. If we don't fight it, then it's gonna go in, and they're gonna say that nation accepted it or didn't do anything about it, so they'll keep doing it. And I kind of find it strange because it's coming from a provincial government that did a law that recognized UNDRIP. So to me, it's like they're looking both. The other thing I wanted to say is, I think I was 19, I was on that Constitution Express that went across Canada. I actually was Indian government coordinator. We had 10 trains, 10 cabooses that went across. I know there's different debates about getting the word Aboriginal title in the Constitution. But in the end, I believe they finally, the compromise was the word existing Aboriginal title. And from that, there's about more than 200 legal cases, of which First Nations won a lot of the majority of those cases, and that's why there was changes. That's why you got Aboriginal representation in health, Aboriginal representation in fisheries, Aboriginal representation at BCIT. These all, the mindset kind of changed. So there is some recognition of that, and you know, and now you see there's UNDRIP. I remember a long time ago, the UNDRIP was kind of like a dirty word, you know, or dirty, don't talk about it, that kind of thing. And but I just want to show you what the province is doing. You know, they sign the UNDRIP, but they say you got to pay $10,000 for security because you might leave town. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And certainly if your people were leaving town, everybody would see where you're going, because there's only one way out. Does anybody have one last comment, short comment they may want to make? Judith, because then we'll have time for the video. Any other comments? No? Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I think I came at the crowd a little angry. But I think it's like really important for people to understand, like, relationship building is absolutely key to climate action, right? Like, it is foundational to climate action, and that's what our communities are built off of. And I cannot emphasize enough, like, Indigenous knowledge being at the foundation of that, right? Our communities, our governance was kinship. And that's just, I think, my biggest takeaway from this conversation is, you know, if we leave here with this newfound family of people that are all trying to change for the better to help each other, like, I think we've done our job here. So I just wanted to say that, so thank you.
We have a room full of cousins now. Bruce, do you want to say a quick comment?
I just can't resist. We could all pass the hat around and maybe raise $10,000 to get the province to leave town. Thank you.
That's a different approach. So we do have the video is 10 minutes, so I'll leave it up to AJ and Aphrodite if they want to introduce the video quickly, but so we can cue it up, please.
Check one. So the video we're going to share is the reconciliation story from done for the project in Gull Bay First Nation, and it just paints you a picture of what happened in the past and the process of our journey through working with OPG. So it's so I hope you enjoy and hope you take something away from that's positive and good for that. And I want to thank Aphrodite, Salas, and their team because it's really our story. And one thing about the calls to action with the UNDRIP is the example with the journalism, because we normally, when I get interviewed sometimes for articles and stuff, I say, well, can I review it before it gets published, because I want to make sure it represents our community well. And there's been a few times where the journalist is like, no, we already got it and it's good. And it's like, oh no, you're worried because then I'm not the smartest guy in the world, or I'm not that smart. My grandpa used to say, I may not be the best, but I'm better than the rest. So that makes me feel, humbly good. But anyways, it's our story, and Aphrodite helped amplify it. So if we can get it shown, that'd be great. Miigwech.
I remember as a kid playing just further down here. I come upon skeletons and I didn't know what they were. I was probably about 8, 9 years old. And I took them to the local priest and they moved the graves over again. Right from my house, we used to walk all the way down here. That was our adventure trail. And every year, the ground would look different because every year it deteriorated, so we had a new playground every year. Along the side here, I remember holes on the side, like you've seen birds nesting. Well, that's what it looked like, but it was graves, like human graves.
Our cemeteries were washed into Lake Nibigan, which left the community having to go retrieve the bodies of their relatives, of their family members, of their uncles and aunties, of their nieces even, their children. So it was very sad, and it was very hurtful. The community was left in pain and sadness and a lot of whys, wondering why is this happening. There was no communication to Gull Bay First Nation that the waterways would be rising.
It was really emotional time for everybody. Everybody was busy working and uncovering, digging, and bringing up whatever they found. And they had to make new boxes, new coffins, I see. It's something that wasn't easy to do, to dig up graves. Who would do that? When things like that happen, it doesn't erase anything, no matter what you do. You could pay somebody, but the memories will always be there unless they have a forgiving heart.
ironic that this lake that's right beside our community is used as a huge reservoir to generate megawatts of power that powers the provincial grid, and yet our community will never be hooked up to the provincial grid. So right now we're 100% reliance on diesel power generation. Burning diesel is dirty energy. It's not very good for the environment, and the only option was to look at other sources of energy. Our goal again is to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining in a green way.
We're not proud of the things our predecessors had done to the community, and this is our opportunity to try to make those things right again. These are the very first solar panels being installed at the Gull Bay Microgrid project site. This is a milestone for the project, and we're really excited to start seeing it come together. And this is just the first few panels. There'll be over 1,000 panels in total. With this microgrid, we will be offsetting a lot of the diesel fuel, and at times actually be able to shut off the diesel and run solely on renewable power. This is a first for Ontario Power Generation, where we will not own and operate once development is finished. This project is completely on Gull Bay First Nation reserve land. We want to see them take full ownership and have successful operations for 20 plus years to come.
Once the project is built, we will be 100% owners immediately, and that's critical. The whole process of reconciliation is also economic reconciliation of First Nation communities. We want to extricate ourselves from poverty and become the economic engines in our own backyards.
That is true reconciliation. They came back, they apologized. It's going to be an ongoing relationship. It's exciting. Exciting for us now and for the next 7 generations. Today we're having an energy show, showcasing clean renewable energies.
Put your light bulb on the line.
It's important to do something like this in any community. This community is special because they're going to solar. So we have a solar station. The kids can hold a solar panel, look at it, touch it, feel it. So when it's out there in the field creating power for the community, they can understand how the whole process works. It's not this big, dark mystery.
I'm excited for it. It's something different, and I can't wait till they turn the switch on. So we'll see how much energy we save.
Well, we need power. We need power. That's what we are short of.
Running your electricity, your power off of diesel is dirty. It's bad for Mother Earth. So this is so important so that we can have clean, reliable energy.
I'm very excited about this project for our community. It's back to our traditional ways by using nature and the sunshine. A lot of First Nations are coming up to us and asking about how we went about doing this, and they'd like to get things going in their communities like that. So yeah, I think we're doing all right.
This is a new era for Canada because we are moving into the future, and there's no stopping it, but we can stop polluting the planet. We can stop destroying what we need all around us, and we can look at cleaner other sources, other means. And we want to share to our brothers and sisters in the north and on the west and south and east, wherever we can, to set our planet for a cleaner future.
Okay, if we could just put the lights up and turn that volume. It was a little challenging, obviously, with Judith being on whatever, digital Zoom. Judith, did you still have a question or a comment that you wanted to make closing out? No? Is she gone? Okay. It's a little hard trying to make sure everybody's included here. But maybe I'll just leave it. So thank you, everybody, for being here, but I'll leave it up to AJ to close us out if he'd like.
Thank you. I don't know if this is unorthodox or anything, but I brought gifts for my fellow panelists and for their time and space and allowing me to share, so. I didn't bring gifts for everybody though, so I'm sorry. And I get nervous about gift giving because I don't want to leave people out, but certainly wanted to. Just also mention, Mayingan Development Corp is Gull Bay First Nations Development Corp, and Mayingan is the wolf, which is the hunter for, showing you money and funding.
So this is the advantage of being on a panel. So next time you're asked, sign up.
And Kevin
did
Belmore,
not know.
Kevin Belmore coloring boxes or coloring pages. Kevin Belmore is an Anishinaabe artist in our community. So
nice.
There you go.
Thank you.
So thank you, miigwech.
So good. Okay. All right, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you staying late. Thank you, thank you. This is a nice way to end the day, isn't it?
Thank you, everybody, for that powerful session. If I can ask everybody just to stay just for 2 minutes. We're not going to do the facilitated table discussions. I just don't think that is kind of the right mood right now. But I do want to request, from what we just have heard on that session about past harms to Indigenous people, trauma that continues today, and their fight to regain their justice and rights. I would like everybody just to take 1 minute, in silence, if I can have that permission. And just think about what this personally means for each and every one of you in this room, whether you work for government or industry or your own renewable energy company. There's questions around what can you do tomorrow. So everybody has a responsibility, including myself, to uphold Indigenous rights. And there's a sacred fire out there where there's tobacco and cedar and smudging. So sit with that for a minute. Sit with your prayer, what you want to bring personally to this to improve the lives of Indigenous people. And however you want to take that, if you want to take that out to the fire over the next days and offer that prayer to the fire, I just request that 1 minute of just thinking about that. And then we'll end. Thank you. Silence is powerful. It's hard sometimes, but we need to listen to everything we heard today. So thank you everybody for the great day, and we will see you tomorrow.